My name is Valerie Vance. I'm 35 years old, and on the night my sister told me to move into the guest house over my own garage, I didn't argue. I smiled, refilled her wine glass, and started making 3 phone calls before she'd even finished her sentence. Let me back up. I bought the property at 214 Ridgecrest Lane in Belmont Heights, San Francisco, on March 3, 4 years ago, for $3.9 million. It wasn't inherited. I didn't marry into it. I built it, 12-hour days at Halcyon Capital Partners, a hedge fund where I started as an analyst answering phones, and ended up managing a $600 million portfolio by the time I was 32. The house had 6 bedrooms, a wine cellar my late father would have wept over, and a view of the bay that made grown men go quiet on the terrace. My father, Marcus Vance, built a real estate empire out of a single duplex in Oakland back in 1987. He died when I was 28, and everything he taught me about patience, leverage, and never showing your hand at the table lived in that house with me. My sister Chloe is 11 years younger. Our mother passed in January, and 2 weeks after the funeral, Chloe called me crying, saying she couldn't stay in Mom's old apartment alone. I told her to come stay with me. That was my mistake, not the kindness, but what I didn't know was walking in the door behind her. His name was Damon Sterling. Chloe met him 4 months earlier at a rooftop event in Marina District. 29, always in a blazer that fit slightly too well, always talking about a crypto fund he was quietly closing. I didn't like him from the first handshake. He held eye contact half a second too long, like he was calculating something behind it. Within 2 weeks of moving in, Damon had rearranged my study into what he called his workspace. Within 3, he'd told Maria Ramirez, the woman who has run my household for 15 years, who nursed my father through his final months, that her services were no longer necessary going forward, as if he had any authority to say that in my house. I found her crying in the kitchen the next morning, packing her things. I unpacked them myself and told her nobody was going anywhere. That was the first time I understood this wasn't going to stay small. By early May, I noticed things missing. A small Diebenkorn sketch that hung in the east hallway. A 2009 Screaming Eagle from the cellar my father had specifically told me never to sell. When I asked Chloe about it, she waved it off. Damon was getting them appraised, she said, for insurance purposes. I didn't believe her. But I also didn't confront her yet. My father used to say that the moment you show someone you're watching them, you lose the only advantage you have. So I watched. On the evening of June 14th, Chloe threw what she called a family dinner, candles, a caterer she hadn't asked me to pay for but somehow expected me to, and Damon's parents, Richard and Eleanor Sterling, sitting at my table like they already owned the chairs. I remember the exact moment. Chloe set down her glass, looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen since we were teenagers fighting over our mother's attention, and said it plainly, like she was reading off a script. Damon's parents sold their house in Reno. They're moving into the main house tomorrow. You can take the guest house over the garage, or find an apartment downtown. We think it's time you gave some space back to the family. Space back to the family. In a house with my name on the deed. Paid for with money she'd never once asked how I earned. I didn't raise my voice. I looked at Richard and Eleanor, who wouldn't meet my eyes, then at Damon, who was smiling like he'd already won something. Then I looked at my sister and said, of course. Let me know what day works best for the movers. Chloe looked almost disappointed that I didn't cry. I went up to my room that night and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, not because I was broken, but because I was doing math. 4 years of tax filings. Deed transfers. The name on every utility bill. None of it had Chloe's name on it. None of it had Damon's. This was never a house they had any legal claim to, which meant whatever they were planning had nothing to do with rights, and everything to do with pressure. At 11:40 p.m., I heard Damon on the back patio, phone pressed to his ear, pacing near the pool. My study window was cracked open. I picked up my own phone and hit record. What I heard over the next 6 minutes rearranged everything I thought I understood about the last 2 months. Damon wasn't talking to a friend. He was talking to a man he called Andre, discussing something he referred to as a residency claim, filing paperwork to establish Chloe and his parents as long-term tenants of the property, backdated with a signed agreement neither Chloe nor I had ever created. And then, almost as an afterthought, he mentioned a number that made my stomach drop. The loan closes Friday. $1.5 million, using the villa as collateral. Signatures already on file. My signature. On a loan I never applied for, against a house Damon Sterling had no legal right to touch. I sat in the dark of my study, recording still running, and for the first time since my father died, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in years, not fear, not grief, but the particular, focused calm that comes right before you decide exactly what you're going to do to someone. I saved the recording to 3 separate devices before I went to bed. The next morning, I smiled at my sister over coffee and told her the guest house sounded lovely. I told Damon's parents I'd have the main suite cleared out by the weekend. None of them knew that by Friday afternoon, I would have already sold the house out from under all 4 of them, and that the buyer wasn't interested in closing slowly. They had 4 days left in that house. They just didn't know it yet. Friday morning, I called Julian Croft before I'd finished my first cup of coffee. Julian had been my father's attorney before he became mine, a sharp, unshakable man who'd spent 11 years doing mergers and acquisitions before he ever handled a family matter. I'd used him twice before, both times for business, never for anything personal. This felt personal in a way I hadn't planned for, but I needed someone who thought in contracts, not emotions. I need you to pull the deed history on Ridgecrest Lane, I told him. And I need to know how fast we can close an all-cash sale on a property this size. How fast are we talking? Under a week. There was a pause on the line. Julian had known me long enough to recognize when I wasn't asking a hypothetical question. Valerie, what happened? I played him 30 seconds of the recording. Just enough, Damon's voice, the word collateral, the number $1.5 million, my name where it didn't belong. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, send me everything. I'm calling a forensic document examiner within the hour. By 10 a.m., Julian had confirmed what I already suspected. The loan application had been submitted through a private lending firm called Ashcroft Meridian, a group that specialized in fast, high-interest loans against real estate, the kind of place that didn't ask many questions if the paperwork looked clean enough. My signature had been lifted from a scanned copy of a wire authorization I'd signed months earlier for a wine cellar insurance claim, the same claim Damon had used as his excuse to have the Diebenkorn and the Screaming Eagle appraised. He hadn't just been stealing small things. He'd been building a paper trail, piece by piece, to make himself look like someone with legitimate access to my property and my signature. This isn't clumsy, Julian said. This is someone who's done it before. That sent me down a different path entirely. I spent that afternoon doing something I should have done the day Chloe first introduced him. I ran Damon Sterling's name properly. Not a casual search. A real one, the kind I'd run on companies before wiring 8 figures into them. What came back wasn't a crypto fund. It was a pattern. 2 years earlier in Scottsdale, Arizona, a woman named Renata Okafor had filed a police report against a man named Dominic Ashford, same face, different name, confirmed by a photo from a real estate closing she'd posted online months before deleting her account. The complaint described almost the exact same sequence: move in with a wealthy partner's family, isolate the household staff, quietly siphon high-value assets, then attempt to leverage the property itself before disappearing. The case had gone nowhere. No arrest. Insufficient documentation, according to the file Julian's investigator pulled. I wasn't going to be the case that went nowhere. Richard and Eleanor Sterling weren't innocent bystanders either. Property records showed they'd listed their Reno home on April 2, 6 weeks before Chloe's family dinner announcement, and it had already closed. They weren't planning to move in as a temporary favor. They had nowhere else to go. Their entire financial future was riding on a house that wasn't theirs. That's when I understood the shape of what I was dealing with. This wasn't a boyfriend problem. It was a small, coordinated operation, and my sister was either a participant or a very convenient piece of cover. I didn't know which yet. Some nights that week, I genuinely didn't want to find out. By Wednesday, Julian had lined up the buyer. Blackwood Global Corp had been quietly acquiring property in Belmont Heights for 18 months, assembling land for what internal documents called a private executive retreat, the kind of thing tech founders paid absurd sums for discretion and proximity to the city. Their acquisitions director, a woman named Priya Nazari, had toured my house 8 months earlier during an unrelated appraisal and made an offer I declined at the time. I called her back myself. Is the offer still on the table? For the right terms, yes. I need it closed in 5 days. All cash. And I need physical possession to transfer to you immediately at closing, no grace period, no transition window. Priya was quiet for a second, and then she laughed, the kind of laugh that told me she understood exactly what kind of situation produces that request. That's an unusual ask. I'll take $300,000 off asking if you can make it happen. We closed at $3.8 million. Cash. Signed Thursday afternoon. There was one more thing I needed to do before Friday, and it mattered more to me than the money did. I called Maria. Maria Ramirez had been let go from my house by a man who had no right to fire her, in a house he had no right to touch, and she'd left quietly because that's who Maria was. She didn't make scenes, even when a scene was deserved. I found her a 2-bedroom condo in San Mateo, fully furnished, paid in full, and had the keys delivered to her with a note that just said, "Thank you for 15 years. This one's yours, no strings." She called me crying. I told her the truest thing I knew that week: you protected this family when the family stopped protecting you back. I don't forget that. Thursday night, I sat in my study one last time, looking at a house that in about 14 hours would legally belong to a corporation I'd never set foot in, packed with strangers in security uniforms instead of my father's old photographs. Chloe was upstairs, humming while she planned her housewarming post for the next morning. Damon and his parents' moving trucks were already scheduled to arrive at 9 a.m. None of them had any idea the deed had already changed hands. None of them knew that the fraud complaint Julian filed with the San Francisco District Attorney's Office that afternoon had already been assigned a case number, or that a financial crimes detective had spent Wednesday evening cross-referencing Damon Sterling's fingerprints against an outstanding warrant out of Maricopa County under the name Dominic Ashford. I turned off the study light around midnight, and went to bed early for the first time in weeks. Tomorrow, 3 moving trucks were going to pull up to a house that no longer belonged to anyone inside it, and the people standing at that front door waiting for them wouldn't be carrying welcome mats. Thursday morning at 9:04 a.m., I stood on the balcony of the master suite with a cup of coffee, watching 3 moving trucks turn onto Ridgecrest Lane. Chloe had been up since 6, filming, getting ready, content for her Instagram, sweeping shots of the foyer, the chandelier, the wine cellar she had no idea was 40% empty because of items already flagged in a police evidence inventory. "This is it," she said into her phone camera, her voice bright with a kind of performance I recognized from when we were kids, and she wanted our mother's attention. New chapter, new home, and honestly, growth means letting go of people who can't be happy for you. I wondered, watching from the balcony, if that line was about me. Damon arrived at the front gate at 9:15 in a car that wasn't his, a rental, I'd later learn, since his own had been repossessed 3 weeks earlier, a detail his own parents apparently didn't know. He walked up the front steps with the easy confidence of a man who believed the hardest part was already behind him. He'd spent 2 months building a paper trail. As far as he knew, all that was left was moving boxes. He put his key into the front lock. It didn't turn. He tried again, jiggling it, laughing it off to Chloe as probably swelled from the fog. Then the door opened from the inside, not by Chloe, not by me, but by Julian Croft, dressed in a dark suit, flanked by 4 uniformed private security officers from Blackwood Global and 2 San Francisco police officers standing slightly behind them on the walkway. I watched from the upstairs window as Chloe's phone, still live streaming to nearly 4,000 viewers, began shaking in her hand. Julian didn't raise his voice. He never does. Mr. Sterling, this property was sold and closed yesterday at 4:12 p.m. You are currently standing on private property belonging to Blackwood Global Corporation. This is a formal notice of trespass. You have 20 minutes to remove personal items only, clothing, medication, essential documents. All furnishings inside now belong to the new owner per the terms of sale. Damon's face did something I'd waited 2 months to see, the mask slipping, just for a second, before he tried to rebuild it. There's a mistake. We have an agreement with the resident. My family's tenancy. There is no tenancy agreement on file, Julian said, holding up a folder. There is, however, a fraud complaint filed with the San Francisco District Attorney's Office regarding a $1.5 million loan application submitted using a forged signature and falsified collateral documentation. That's when the second police officer stepped forward. Dominic Ashford, he said, and I watched Damon's whole body go still at the sound of a name he hadn't heard out loud in 2 years. We have an outstanding warrant for you out of Maricopa County, Arizona. You're under arrest for financial fraud and identity theft. Chloe's phone hit the concrete steps. I heard the crack from the balcony. 4,000 people had just watched her boyfriend get handcuffed on the front steps of a house she'd told her sister to leave. Richard and Eleanor Sterling arrived 11 minutes later, following the second moving truck, only to find their son in the back of a patrol car, and a security officer explaining that the property they'd planned to move into no longer had any legal connection to their family. They stood on the sidewalk beside 3 trucks packed with everything they owned, because they'd already sold their home in Reno believing this one was as good as theirs. I didn't go downstairs during any of it. I'd told Julian before he arrived that I didn't need to be the one standing in that doorway. I'd built the whole structure so I wouldn't have to be. What I did do was walk down 20 minutes later, once the security team had escorted Damon's parents off the property, and the second officer had finished reading Chloe her rights regarding the falsified tenancy documents she'd apparently signed at Damon's request 3 weeks earlier, a detail that told me she hadn't just been cover. She'd known. Chloe was standing at the curb, mascara down her face, staring at me like I was a stranger. You sold the house, she said. You sold our house. It was never our house, Chloe. It was mine. You told me to pack my bags in a home I bought with money you never once asked how I earned, so that a man who's been running this exact scheme since at least 2023 could take it from me piece by piece. I just made sure he couldn't finish. I didn't know about the loan, she said, and maybe that part was even true. I didn't know he was. You knew enough to sign a tenancy agreement claiming residency you never had. That's a separate conversation you're going to have with a detective, not with me. I turned and walked back toward the car Julian had waiting for me. Behind me, I heard Chloe start crying in a way I hadn't heard since our mother's funeral, not performative, not for an audience this time, because for once there wasn't one. The live stream had ended the moment her phone shattered on the steps. I didn't look back at the house. I'd already said goodbye to it the night I made the first call to Julian. What I hadn't expected was how light I'd feel watching it disappear behind me, knowing everything inside now belonged to strangers who would never know or care what almost happened inside those walls. Julian slid into the seat across from me in the car. DA's office wants a full statement from you Monday. And Valerie, the Maricopa detective, wants to talk. Apparently you're not the first person who managed to actually make something stick to this man. I looked out the window as the estate shrank in the side mirror. Good, I said. Then let's make sure I'm the last. Monday morning, I sat across from Detective Enalcon Correas in a small interview room that smelled like burnt coffee, and I told her everything, the recording, the timeline, Maria's termination, the missing wine, the sketch that turned up 3 weeks later in a consignment shop in Sausalito with a fabricated provenance document. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs of 4 other women, spanning 6 years and 3 states. Renata Okafor in Scottsdale. A woman named Priscilla Yun in Austin who'd lost a rental property before she even realized what was happening. A widow in Denver who'd nearly signed over power of attorney before her son intervened. And me. You're the first one with an actual recording, Okonkwo Reyes said. The first one who moved faster than he did. Every other case, he was gone before charges stuck. This time you had the deed sold and the fraud reported before he even finished unpacking. I thought about that for a long time after I left the precinct. Not the 4 other women, though I thought about them too, and gave the detective everything I had to help build cases against him in 3 jurisdictions I'd never even considered, but about the fact that speed, not anger, had been the thing that actually protected me. My father used to tell me that revenge built on rage burns out before it finishes the job. Revenge built on preparation doesn't need rage at all. It just needs to already be done by the time the other person notices you're moving. Damon, Dominic, pled guilty 4 months later to avoid extradition and a longer trial across 2 states. 5 years with restitution ordered to 4 victims, including me, though I never expected to see most of that money and told Julian not to waste billable hours chasing it. The name mattered more than the number. His face was in enough local news coverage by then that whatever identity he'd try to build next would take considerably more effort than the last one had. Richard and Eleanor Sterling moved into a rental outside Vallejo. I heard through a cousin, months later, that Eleanor had gotten a job at a dental office reception desk at 61 years old, starting over from nothing because they'd staked their entire retirement on a house that was never going to be theirs. I felt something when I heard that, but I couldn't quite call it satisfaction. It was closer to the specific tiredness you feel watching people learn a lesson the most expensive way possible. Chloe was never charged with fraud. The DA's office decided the tenancy document, while dishonest, didn't rise to the same level as what Damon had built, and I didn't push for more than that. But she lost the apartment she'd been staying in with a friend after our fallout, and by autumn she was waitressing double shifts at a bistro in the Mission to cover rent, and what remained of a credit card Damon had opened in her name without her realizing it either. She called me in October. I almost didn't pick up. "I'm not asking you for money," she said before I could say anything. "I just wanted to say I know what I let happen. I knew about the tenancy paper. I didn't know about the loan, but I knew enough that I should have asked more questions, and I didn't because it was easier not to. I didn't forgive her that day. I'm still not entirely sure I have, 18 months later, though we talk now, carefully, the way you talk to someone you love but no longer fully trust, checking the ground before you put your weight on it. She's 26 now, still waitressing, taking 2 night classes toward a degree in hospitality management. She hasn't asked me for a dime, and I respect that more than I expected to. I bought a penthouse on the 11th floor of a building overlooking the bay 6 weeks after the Ridgecrest sale closed. No wine cellar. No sprawling east hallway. Just a clean, quiet space with a view I don't have to share with anyone who thinks kindness is the same thing as weakness. Maria still comes by every other Sunday. We drink coffee on the balcony and talk about nothing important, which after everything, feels like the most valuable thing left standing. People ask me sometimes if I regret not screaming at Chloe that morning on the curb, not making her understand in the moment exactly what she'd done. I tell them the truth, the silence was the point. I didn't need her to feel it while I was watching. I needed her to feel it every single day afterward, when the house was gone, when the trucks were gone, when the man she chose over her own sister was 3 states away in a cell, and there was nothing left to live stream. She told me to pack my bags. I let her keep the boxes. I just made sure there was nothing left inside them worth carrying.